Must be kind of like the Oscars. I call the Tuesday, March 12th, 2024 City Council discussion only meeting of the East Lansing City Council to order. At the opening of the meeting, could we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Altman.
Here.
Councilmember Meadows.
Here.
Councilmember Watson.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Singh. Mayor Brookover.
Here. Could we have a motion to excuse Ms. Ebersol Singh?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion passes unanimously. Next on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion to approve the agenda passes unanimously. Communications from the audience. I have two sheets here. Ms. Root.
Good evening. I'm Chris Root, and my comment is about the strategic priorities item on your agenda. I'm a member of the East Lansing Independent Police Oversight Commission, but I'm not representing the whole commission tonight. I attended the council's two recent meetings about setting strategic priorities, and I have been eager to see what specific work ELPD would include under your priority number 1. That's the priority that says efficient, effective, and modern operations through standardizing technological processes and systems and attracting and retaining employees. ELPD identified 4 activities under this priority in the item on your agenda, the 4th of which points to the 21st Century Policing Report. Pillar 2 of that report says, law enforcement agencies should have clear and comprehensive policies on the use of force and a number of other issues. It then goes on to talk about the need for reporting, and I want to call particular attention to this. It says, these policies should also include provisions for the collecting of demographic data of all the parties involved. All policies and aggregate data should be made publicly available to ensure transparency. I urge you to consider working with the police department to add the following task under your priority number 1. Improve the ELPD data management system that holds data about use of force incidents and traffic stops so that statistical reports can be created and trends monitored over time. This recommendation has been made to the police department since at least November 2022. At that time, the CNA Corporation presented a report that explained in detail problems with the current ELPD data system. This report was the output of a $110,000 contract with ELPD. Then in June 2023, the Police Oversight Commission described the same problems and made the same recommendation when we presented our 2022 annual report to Council. We recommended that the police department, the commission, and the city council work together to solve this because data is important to all those stakeholders and more. We are now working in the commission on our 2023 annual report, and it is still not possible to run any statistical analysis on use of force data. Actually, our 2023 annual report will include quantitative summaries about more topics about use of force than last year's report did, but it is all still based on sorting and counting. You should know that it probably took 6 or 7 days to compile and summarize this data because it is not structured so it can be entered into a statistical software program to yield accurate information. The council can't rely on having volunteer members of the commission willing to spend this kind of time every year into the future to compile this data. Doing it this way is better than nothing, but it really isn't satisfactory. It really is not a system of data reporting at all, and it is certainly not efficient, effective, and modern. It's not reliable either. The police department needs to update its data management system so the police department, the council, the Oversight Commission, and the community can rely on having accurate analysis and reports of use of force and traffic stops on a regular basis. It's really past time to take on this challenge. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your input.
I should say, since, it's done. I'm looking forward to the MERS report too. That's all I wanted to say.
As are we all. Dr. Connerly.
I have to say, Mayor, thank you for calling me Dr. Conley. I'm not a doctor yet. I still have a year to go before I'm a doctor.
You got that thesis written yet?
Almost. All right. Hello, Mayor Brookover and council members. On Friday, March 1st, 2024, the East Lansing Police Oversight Commission was made aware of proposed amendments to the Ordinance 1503. So we are here today to express our views about the proposed amendments to Ordinance 1503. Which was attached to the council's March 5th agenda. And we urge you to consider 3 additional amendments from us that we believe would improve the ordinance. We request that council do this during their March 19th meeting. We note that 5 of the 7 proposed amendments are about discipline for individual ELPD employees. The existing ordinance does not give the East Lansing Police Oversight Commission, Independent Police Oversight Commission, a role in determining discipline for individual officers, so these amendments do not take away from the current duties of LEPOC. However, the commission has not taken any action regarding discipline in its more than 2 years' existence. Therefore, we have no objections to the amendments in section 2493A, 2494A, and 2495. We have no objection to the definition in section 2473. However, the remaining amendments, 1 to the purpose statement of the LEPOC ordinance and to section 2485, clause part B, and to 2493I in its entirety, we vehemently believe will cause harm to the ordinance and the purpose of LEPOC. These amendments are as follows. Proposed amendment number 1, it is recognized that the commission's role is advisory. The commission does not possess or exercise administrative or supervisory authority over the East Lansing Police Department or its employees. We urge you not to adopt this amendment as it contradicts the purpose and the intent of the overall ordinance and does not align with the administrative law judge's comment that the changes to the ordinance need to make it abundantly clear that LEPOC does not determine discipline. The purpose statement should remain a clear statement of why the council established the commission, stating that the role does not, stating those changes to the roles that LEPOC does not possess, and the purpose statement is confusing. LEPOC has never exercised was never intended to exercise any administrative power. However, as emphasized in the commission's name, we require independence from the police department to exercise oversight, which would be lost by adding these words to the purpose statement. Adding the word advisory would also interfere with the commission's ability to pursue recommendations, dig deeper into investigations, seeks the city manager's appeal, or disagree with the findings of the police department. Thus, we urge you to focus on what LEPOC's clear mission is, an essential principle, LEPOC's clear mission of independence, an essential principle set by the National Associations of Oversight and Law Enforcement. Proposed amendment number 2 and 3, 2-485A, clause B, 2 says, but shall not make any recommendations regarding any aspect of discipline, and 2-49 says the commission shall not make any recommendations regarding the discipline to be issued, if any, to any police department employee involved in the complaints in its entirety. We urge you not to adopt these amendments to the section because the language prevents the commission from making recommendations or prevents the commission from recommending action within our scope, for example, further training. Using the word recommendation creates confusion and may violate other aspects of the ordinance. For example, the free speech clause or the ability for the commission to recommend training. To avoid this confusing language within the ordinance, we suggest that phrasing the changes to state shall not determine any aspects of employee discipline and shall not determine the discipline to be issued, if any, to any police department employee to the section
30 seconds
respectively.
remaining.
Sounds good. We also submit to you 3 proposed amendments, 1 to section 2474 outlining how commission members are appointed. Amendment 2 under section 2, the budget, outline asking for legal counsel, and amendment 3 asking for cooperation in requiring the police to respond to our recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight for your input. Okay, anybody else in the audience wishes to speak? Do we have anybody in the queue?
There are no callers in the queue.
Okay, moving on then. Communication from council members. Ms. Watson? Anything?
I have to pull it up, so.
Okay.
Is it okay if I-
Dr. Altman?
Thank you, Mayor. No report this evening.
Mr. Meadows?
Same.
I'm going to be quiet, so do you need some more time?
Fine, I'll just add.
Well, no, that's okay. We can go back to you after
Okay,
Mr.
thanks.
Bellman.
Okay.
Does that work? Mr. Bellman?
I have one item, and that is to announce that the East Lansing Family Aquatic Center is hiring lifeguards, slide operators, and customer service assistants. It pays anywhere between $13 and $14.50 per hour, depending on the position, and you can find more information on the city's website.
What was the first one?
Lifeguards,
No, there was something about a slide.
slide operators,
What is
Pool
that?
slide?
What does that pay?
$13.
Could I supplement my salary on the city council by
Nope.
doing that job? Do I have to be a certified lifeguard to do that? Okay.
So
Things-
we'll expect to see you in your bathing suit out at the aquatic.
You can expect whatever you want, Mr. City Manager. Good luck with that. Ms. Watson, do you have something?
Yeah, thank you for waiting for
No
me.
sweat.
So speaking of pay, Governor Whitmer passed a resolution today calling March 12th, 2024 Equal Pay Day. And so it recognizes the pay differentials between women and men. And I'm just going to read one of the whereases that struck me because it talks about the whole 40-year accumulation of wealth or lack thereof. Whereas on today's wage gap, a woman who works full-time year-round could lose $3,999, I'll just say $400,000 over a 40-year career, a lifetime gap that only grows when examined by race and ethnicity. And I'll read another whereas wage gap typically means an annual loss of $22,000 for Black women, $30,000 for Latinas, $28,000 for Native women, and $5,000 for Asian American, Hawaiian, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander. And so just wanted to uplift that as we think about the power that we do have and the choices that we do make towards equal pay for all genders.
Thank you. Anything else?
Nope, thank you.
Okay. We move on to item number 6, discussion items. The first matter is item 6.1, Municipal Employees Retirement System, also known as MERS, of Michigan City of East Lansing Annual Actuarial Valuation Report as of December 31st, 2022. And I want to emphasize that for the public and the audience. This is as of year-end 2022. So MERS does their actuarial data. I'm not going to say it's a year behind, but it's a year behind, but that's because they have to do it that way, so. Go ahead. Thank you. Could you identify yourself for the record, please?
Absolutely. Good evening. My name is Marnie Daggett. I'm the regional manager that works with the City of East Lansing. And so we will be going through kind of the highlights of the annual valuation that you have in front of you and on the screen. And then you also have another report. And then I'll also be, please let me know if you have any questions, because this can get boring if you don't ask questions. So go ahead. We'll start with page 6 of the report, which is the executive summary. And as the mayor mentioned, this is your 2022 report. It does dictate your fiscal year that begins, so the budget that you have coming up in July of this year. So this is the correct data for starting July of 2024. You will get your 2023 report this summer so that you'll have a full year to plan your budget for next year's 2025. That's why there's a delay, so you have time from a budget perspective. When you look at that from 2021 to 2022, the funding for the city moved from 61% funded to 63% funded. So you made an improvement in your funding. I will note that that is something that will be a little bit more unique for the city, and that is because of the extra contributions that you were putting in. So you were doing a lot of work to start paying off that unfunded liability, because 2022, I know last year was a great year from an investment perspective, very volatile, but ended on a high note. 2022 is quite the opposite, and so that is part of the impact of the report. If you move down.
So let me just,
Yes.
so what you're telling us all, including the public, is 2022 was not a good year in terms of the investment vehicles, but you're anticipating that 2023 was a much, much better year regarding the investment vehicles. And so you would expect this report to be more positive the next time you give it. Is that correct?
That's a packed answer. That's a packed question, but
I'm an attorney. I ask back questions all the time.
so you're doing
I'm
very
sorry,
good.
it's a- it's
No, that's
habitual.
fantastic.
So tell me why I'm wrong, please.
Oh no, I'm not saying you're wrong. What I will share
I
is
don't know why not. Everybody else in this town tells me I'm wrong. Why should you be the only one?
You know what? I don't know. I'm trying to be amenable.
I'm
There
sorry.
you go.
I'll stop.
It's all good. So when we look, for example, the market has been extremely volatile. So 2020, 2021, we were in positive 13, 14% returns. 2022, we were at a negative 10.6, so a really big drop. In 2023, we were at 11.9. So again, you've got this large dip down. The challenge with those, just say, well, there was a 10 and there was 11, so that kind of evens out, is when you look at pension plans, we have something called smoothing. And that's because we know that municipalities don't have the ability, like private sector companies, where their budget can just do this all the time. You need more of a smooth, stable, predictable budget, because you can't just go off and sell other stocks or do other things from that perspective. And so what happens is we do something called smoothing, and we have a 5-year smoothing. This is a national recommendation across the nations for pensions, where you take our assumption rate, which for 2022 and 2021, for example, was 7%. Any returns above or below that 7%, that gain or loss is smoothed out over 5 years. So you experience a fifth of that loss or a fifth of that gain over the next 5 years. So yes, you had some gains from the previous years, and you have a loss from this year, and then you'll have another gain. So it's going to smooth that out. So you're not going to see this immediate washing. So it's a little bit more complex, I guess, is my answer.
Okay, I just want to make one last
Yes.
insertion, and then I'll shut up. I
No, you don't
promise.
need to.
So I want you to understand, these 3 people here are all public employees or past public employees, and they all have pensions.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them, I think, through you, some of them not. So if you can explain to them what's happened in their pensions in the last 2 or 3 years, you've probably done a lot. So,
Okay.
I just...
My pension is constitutionally
Protected. Yes,
Yeah,
I know.
And thank you, Mr. Meadows, for making this point. And Dr. Altman's pension, I think, is TIF-CREF, so that's a whole different ballgame.
It is.
So it's a deal. Okay?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yep. Because from a pension, from an employee perspective, what you're drawing, your amount does not fluctuate. But funding the plan is much more complex
Well,
than drawing.
Clearly, Mr. Meadows doesn't fluctuate. Dr.
Right.
Altman, you had a question.
Thank you. So I don't get a pension, just to be clear, but that's okay.
You apparently didn't have a very good attorney negotiating that deal coming into Michigan State.
I do have a question. So I think you hinted at this. So we went up from 61 to 63, but it sounds like other governmental units might not have gone up over that period.
Yes.
So we're doing better than other governmental units in that sense.
For some.
For some.
Again, because you put in the additional contributions, that's why you saw that go up. But traditionally, when you have a loss year and you're experiencing a loss, you're going to experience a fifth of that. That can cause your lowering to go down. When I look at your overall funding level, again, it depends on what we're looking at as a category of better than others, because there are some groups that are 100% funded
Right.
that may have gone down to 98, whereas you were in the 60s. So, but from a perspective of, because you did those additional contributions, you still moved up in a down year, that is to be commended.
Okay, that's the point I was trying to
Perfect. I
emphasize.
just wanted to make
Yeah.
sure we were using the same terms.
Yeah,
So.
thank you.
Absolutely. If we go to the next page, I'll show you just briefly from a budget perspective. So the next page is page 7. Is there any way we can enlarge that, or is that pretty much what we've got? It's going to be hard to read.
I think that's pretty much what we
Okay,
got.
that's okay. I'll just share that you'll see from 2020, so for those of you who are looking on the screen for a budget, if you look at the far right column, the no phase-in amount for July 1st of 2023 at the bottom, the total required contribution is $9,652,680. For July of 2024, the no phase-in, so 2 columns over to the left, sorry, right to left, the contribution requirement goes down a little bit. I'm going to encourage you not to do that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But that contribution amount is $9,153,000. Okay. The employee contribution rates are staying the same. That's on the next page. Now we're going to go to page 9, which in the top paragraph, simply want to share with you, the top 2 paragraphs just shares that the investment assumption is 7%. So again, when we look over the long term, so we look over a 20, 30, 40-year time horizon, we're looking at what we think the average will be. Not what it's going to be this year and next year, but the average over time. Because people work for a period of time, and then they're in retirement for a period of time, and that's usually 30, 40, 50 years in existence. So when this is covering a lifetime benefit, again, we look long time horizon. So at this point, we're at a 7% assumption. Okay?
So let me just ask the question about, over what, is this the 5-year smoothing to do this?
No, this is over the long
how-
period of time. Mhm.
So how many years is that?
So I would say we look at like a 40-year,
40 years,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
but they'll look at that every time we do an experience study. The actuaries, our global investment managers, all of those people like look at all of the data and run that through a Monte Carlo simulation and like look at what they think will happen in the marketplace over a long period of time.
I'm sorry, did you say Monte Carlo?
I did.
situation?
I didn't want to make you hungry for like a sandwich or anything or a vacation, but
No,
yes.
I don't think that's what it makes me hungry about it.
Okay, there you go.
That's where the investments are, in Monte Carlo.
Yeah, right.
No, don't start that rumor. No. You're not allowed to do that. At the bottom of page 9 refers to the Protecting Mission Pension Grant Program. The City of East Lansing was a recipient, I can't speak anymore, of that. A little over $7.6 million. That is not reflected in this report because those assets came in 2023. So you will see that in your next report, okay? And that will be in the surplus division. I knew that's where you were going. So that will be in the surplus division for the city to then decide when they want to use those funds.
And the surplus division, just to be clear, is factored into our funded ratio.
It is, but it
Right.
is not reflected in these numbers yet.
And it's also not going to be reflected in our required annual contribution.
Correct.
Okay.
Intentionally, absolutely. The top of page 10 talks about that asset smoothing. So if you're wanting a little bit more information, I always encourage groups to look at that bold sentence that we always have in the middle of that paragraph each year, because there's that smooth rate of return, and then there's the market rate of return. So for example, this bold sentence says the smooth actuarial rate of return for 2022 was 3.51. So again, you had some gains from the previous year, so you still had a positive gain of 3.51, while the actual market rate of return was a negative 10.6. So that's why you're seeing some of that still positive, and so you'll see that in some of the charts that we look at later because of that smoothing. We're going to skip down to page 12. We're going to go to the top of the chart. When you look at that, you can see kind of the forecast for the next few years. We look at an assumption of 7%, 6%, and 5%. So if we moved our assumption rates, but as you know, your 7% assumption, this is without any surplus division funds. You can see for 2022, which is your July 1 of 2024, your accrued liability assets funded level, again, is 63%, and your annual required contribution is $9,153,000. You can see for the next few years, so we list out the next 6 years, what that annual required contribution is going up to. So by July of 2029, it will be at $13 million. Okay, so you see that increase to pay off some of that unfunded liability. So that gives you an idea for the next few years. In a dollar amount, it will change. Because I said the market return last year, we have dedicated gains that we'll be talking about. We also have the grant fund, so we have a lot of different moving parts in there, but it gives you a ballpark number.
And this assumes that you're going to maintain the 7% going forward, is that?
Correct, and with dedicated gains, and so when we had a return of 2023, again, that was 11.9% return. That is above the 7% assumption, which kicks in the dedicated gains. So we don't have that calculation yet, but that tends to buy down that assumption, plus put in some extra for the smoothing, and so that number will fluctuate, and you will see that in the 2023.
And to go to 5%, the bottom box.
Right.
You would take this 40 years and essentially smooth it out for that as well.
Correct.
That would take quite a downturn, is that?
That would take a massive downturn. We give that information because we do have some municipalities that intentionally budget at a lower assumption rate, so I have one that says we budget at a 6%. So we're going to take those numbers and that's what we're going to budget at because we're trying to catch up. We know we're a mature plan.
Okay.
So some of these numbers are for planning purposes. Sometimes for those who had went out for a bond or were looking at a bond, Treasury like to see that 7, 6, and 5. So some of those are answers to other questions
Yeah,
as well.
because these are scary numbers.
They
in
are
the
scary
bottom
numbers at
box,
5%,
so.
absolutely.
Could I ask a question about that?
Absolutely.
So I know that MERS revised its estimates downward over the past 10 years. It used to be
Yes.
9%, right, at
Correct.
one point, and now it's at 7%. The fact that you've given us 7, 6, and 5, does that reflect an assumption that there's going to be further revisions, or is that just to be conservative and something that you would do in any case? In other words, give us the current rate and then the same number is calculated on rates that are lower than that. Is that
It is
just
not forecasting. We've done that for years because
Okay.
Treasury likes to see that. If people are looking at that for different reports, they like to see if you're bonding, if you're doing any things like that, they like to see the -1 and -2.
and
below
it's
the assumption.
natural to be more conservative rather than give you the less conservative
Correct.
alternatives? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, all right.
I'm sorry, I need to interrupt you. So, I may have missed something, but this particular sheet, you use this phrase, no phase-in. What does that mean again?
So the phase-in, it's the last year of that, so we won't be talking about it much anymore. But what we do is every 5 years we do something called an experience study. So we have these forecasts out for 40 years of what we think it's going to do. But every 5 years we take a measure of what actually happened, and we check if there's a statistical difference between what we forecasted and what actually happened. And so if there is, we make adjustments, like moving from an 8% to a 7.75, 7.35 to a 7%. Mortality tables, things like that can change. So we make those adjustments in that experience study. At that time, there can be a cost increase. For some municipalities, it is difficult for them to make up that cost increase all at once. And so what we do is we give them a 5-year phase-in. So they can phase in that cost increase, just of that increase from the experience study, nothing else, but just that. For those groups, it does in the end cost more than paying the no phase-in amount. So the default is no phase-in, but if you need help in the interim, there is the ability
All
to
right,
phase
so
that in.
now let me ask my real question.
Okay.
So when you use it's actually going to be a series of 3 or 4 questions.
Okay.
So when you use the phrase, quote, no phase-in, end quote, that doesn't mean at some point we're going to get a gift of money from you. That means there ain't no more money, and in fact, based on what you do after a 5-year thing, you may say to us, we need to pay you more money. Correct? Okay. Second question is, now I'm looking at the 7%. And as I understand this, you tell me if I'm wrong, you're saying our funded percentage in 2022 at 7%, understanding that there may be changes in the market to the good this last year, that we were funded at 63%. And now you're projecting in this with no phase-in, so no free money, and 2027 at 7%, you're then projecting that our funded percentage is going to go down to 59%. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Why? Is that your next question?
Oh, no, I know why.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think it would be helpful
Why don't
to.
you tell us why?
I was going to say, I think it would be helpful to go to the next page, which shows the graph, which is page 13. So you can see on that top, you'll see the solid blue line is that, which is the top line, is that 7% assumption. The red dot, the red line, I can't even say that right, that sounds weird, is the 6% assumption, and the purple dotted line is the 5% assumption. When you have a market loss, a negative 10.6, and you smooth it out over 5 years, you're going to go down before you can catch back up. Now, if you put additional contributions in, like you have been doing for the last few years, you won't go down as far, or you won't go down at all, right? You can manage that market loss, and then you catch up on the upswing, essentially. Does that make sense?
Just one other question.
Sure.
The assumption here of 7% is also coupled with your assumption of life expectancy, correct?
Yes.
And is there any movement at MERS to, again, raise life expectancy? Because that builds a hole in our
Sure.
unfunded liability.
So the life expectancy tables, the last time we moved that, so it was the last experience study that ended in 2018. So 2023 is the end of the 5 years, and we will conduct an experience study after we get the 2023 report. That will be issued out and starting the conversation in 2024. That experience study looks at all of those different markers and assumptions that we use, from wage inflation, disability, retirement, all of those pieces, but the two big levers are the investment returns and the life expectancy tables. And so when you look at that, the last movement that we did was to move to public sector tables, which is the first time it's been available, to actually look at public sector workers instead of private sector workers. Good news, as a public sector worker, you live longer. Bad news, it means you cost more, but you do get to live longer, so that's exciting. The second thing is that we went to generational tables. And the reason we did that is so that we don't have such swings in the assumptions, because we're not lumping everyone together. We know that the life expectancy of a 20-year-old is very different than a 60-year-old, is very different than our 80-year-olds. And so now we are in generational tables. They are also gender specific, and they are on public sector. So they are much more accurate. And so the idea is by generational tables, they tend to move along, and so we're hoping there won't be those big jumps. Again, that is the theory behind those generational tables. This will be the first time of testing that, right? Because that's a newer, nuanced thing for us, and so that is what we were expecting from the experts from GRS, and so that's in my humble opinion, I'm hoping for that as well, because that was kind of the idea behind it. If we move this now, it's going to be much more fluid and less impactful in large chunks.
Okay, good.
A question.
Yes.
Do you anticipate, maybe you can't say, but do you anticipate that COVID is going to affect life expectancies in a way that would show up here?
We've asked the actuaries that before, and at this time, the data hasn't shown that as of yet. So I think it's going to be over a longer period of time. We're not far enough out, I think, to see some of that. But it is reflected if it was a direct impact to your plan. Obviously, that's recorded every time that's reported in each annual val.
And then, thank you. And then I have another question. The line, the vertical green line at 2039 or wherever it is, that is fixed in time, right? It doesn't move forward from year to year.
That green line there is that 60% funded, and that's based on PA 202, right? So that's based on
the vertical one.
this one, yes, and this one, because that's when, from an example, you had to be at least 60% funded under PA 202. So we give you the horizontal and the vertical to show when that would be. And as you can see, obviously, you're going to be above that well before that.
What I'm wondering is whether that vertical line moves out from year to year or whether it stays at 2039.
That's a great question. I don't know that. I'd have to look at other vals to see if it's changing. I know from an amortization period, that's right when you're hitting that 100%. So, and that's right about in line with when PA 202, but I'd have to look and see if that changes.
Okay, thank you.
The next table below that is just that contribution structure. So that kind of shows that increase over time, including, but not including surplus division. So when you see the grant money next year in that surplus division, that will not be reflected. So again, to the point, it changes your funding, but it doesn't adjust your contributions. That's a choice you make at that point. Robert, is this the time you'd like to go to the other graph or just kind of do the high level first?
Just run through here, then we can go.
Sounds great. All right.
Can I interrupt you? I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you coming, but the bottom line of what you're showing us with all these numbers and graphs and your wonderful explanation is, despite the fact we've been putting extra money in every year since we passed an income tax and then put additional money in, I think each year that I've been on the council, your projection at this point in time is that our funded percentage is going to just keep going down despite this money we've been putting in.
No, for the next few years, and then it will go up. So you see by by 2036, 2037, you're in the 80s. By 2039, you're at 100%.
Oh, so that's the graph.
That's the graph that shows you where your funding level will be. So yeah, you're going to see that dip down because of that 5-year smoothing, and then you accelerate up to get to that because you're at a fixed amortization, meaning that unfunded liability is going to be paid off at a period of time.
Okay, so can you just give us an estimated year, I understand it's estimated, where we would now be approaching a positive situation? I know I read it in some graph, but so the public understands?
Positive meaning 100% funded?
Or close there too.
Okay. So as you can see with the graph, you can see it like around 2037, you're probably in the 90s, 2038, 2039, 2040, you're at 100%. That's that legacy debt paid off. There still could be fluctuations of what's happening in the current market, but that legacy debt will be paid off. And that's the big story for East Lansing is that legacy debt that you've been paying off over time.
Okay, I mean, that's what I wanted to know, what the big
Yep.
story was. So the big story is going to take us another 14 or 15 years, correct?
If paying at the minimum required amount.
And since we're paying more, it might come earlier.
It will come earlier.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And that's some of the numbers that we're going to look at later is what if we paid at this amount for this period of time, when would we get to 100%? Can we get there in 10 years? Can we, so that conversation.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
And the upswing begins about 2027, is that what I'm seeing on this graph?
2027, 2028, yeah. And
So
again,
we
that doesn't account for
that's
any
when-
additional contribution. This is assuming you pay just the minimum.
Okay.
And not the $7 million from the grant, not any of those dollars. So that will definitely change that trajectory. When you look at table 1, again, when we talk about, let's go to page 15, because we kind of summarize all of the divisions in bold. So I like to just show, that one goes sideways, that's fun. Sorry, I'll just read those numbers, that's fun. But I like to show as an example that your normal cost, which is that column, fourth column from the left, is if the city of East Lansing were 100% funded today, your total annual required contributions would be $2,163,768. But then we take that unfunded liability spread out over the amortization, and that's where we have for that payment 6.989, giving you to the 9.1. So again, a lot of your story is that legacy debt. We're going to skip ahead to Table 2, for those of you looking, is just all of the different provisions for each benefit structure. If we skip to Table 3 on page 25.
I'm sorry, I have a question. I was wondering
Yes.
if you could go back to the table on page 15, because
yep.
I think there was something important there.
Okay.
So the normal cost, which is the cost of our retirement plans for current employees, right, currently
Yes.
active employees, is just over $2 million, which is a small fraction of our total
Of the
required
9.1.
contribution.
Of
And
9.1, yes.
So this is, I think, important for general consumption because it means that our current plans are not what's causing the problem.
Correct.
It's the very large legacy debt that we're dealing with.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
If we go to page 25, at the bottom of that table, we kind of do a cumulative piece. So it kind of shows you, again, from maturity of a plan, you have 200, and as of the end of 2022, you have 291 active employees, 106 vested former employees. That means those are people who have worked here. They're vested. They will get a benefit. They've just left and they're not age eligible to draw yet. So they will draw someday. They're a liability that will come down someday. And then you have 409 retirees. So when you look at that, it's difficult when you've got a cash flow going out, you've got a lot of people drawing and fewer people in the system. That does make it more challenging to catch up from a funding level when you have a mature plan. We're going to go to table 4 is the market value, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But table 5 is my favorite table. It makes me sound like a total nerd, but that's what it is. It's right side up. So this shows you cash flow, and I think that this is really important to look at as well, because it shows your required contribution last year. It shows you the additional that you've been putting in, so that extra work that you've been doing. It shows what the employees contribute. It shows what investment returns and what payments are going out the door for your retirees. So when you look at it from a cash flow perspective, your required contribution was a little over 9.8 million. You put in an additional 7.4, right? So now we're at a little over 17 million, and then the employee's contribution of 150,000. If you look at what it went out the door, is 15,133,683 went to retirees. So essentially, most of what you're putting in is going right back out the door. So why do you not move in funding really fast? Is because of the maturity of the plan. You've got a lot of people drawing, so even when you put that additional in, you are dependent on the market, which wasn't a good year in 2022, to kind of help with that funding. So it feels frustrating to put in 7 million and to feel like, oh, we only moved 2 percentage points. But some of that's because most of that went right back out the door to pay those retirees, so it didn't build the pool back up. And so that's part of the conversation of why, and we've had in the past, of additional contributions are so crucial for mature plans when you've got a lot of that cash flow just going in and out, if that makes sense. So without smoothing, without any fancy stuff, this is just money in, money out. That kind of illustrates that. The final table that I'll go through on this report is table 6. And I think that it's helpful to see that at the bottom of page 28. Again, those numbers are probably pretty small for you, but you can kind of see the total liabilities for each of your columns. So for example, the total liabilities for all of your active employees is a little over 46 million. Vested former employees is a little over 7 million. Retirees and beneficiary is 178 million. 428. So again, a mature plan, right? For the total liability is $232 million, with your assets being $147 million. So when you do the math, that gets you to 63.4% funded. So that total unfunded liability is a little over 85 million. So when you're looking at it, you're going, but we put 7 million in, just remember it's in a bucket of 84 million. And so that impact, it takes a while with cash flow and just the size of the pool. It's going to take some time. And so that's why you have that amortization period that gives you that amount of time to do that. Any questions on that?
No, I think we're questioned out.
Are you questioned out? Okay. Do you want me to show that one graph that we showed, a market value, not smooth value, but market value of what it would look like to what contributions to get to 100% funded in 10 years and 6 years?
I'm not the boss of this crew, so
Okay.
no, but I'm sure somebody else may
I
want
do
to see
have a
that.
question
Sure.
actually on that table 5.
Yes.
I just had a clarification.
Yes.
So we added 15 million that year, and as you indicated, we had to use that, some of that anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But we still raised the total amount that we had, our asset balance, by about 9 million,
You did.
which is essentially equivalent to our required contribution. So we just didn't gain anything.
Yeah.
at that point.
You did gain. You went from 138 million to 147 million in assets. And so from that perspective, good news, right?
So about 6 million had to go towards paying for, okay,
Yep.
so if we continue that, we will continue to
Exactly.
grow on something like that, okay.
Yep. Vote on going to the other graph? or-
Yep, that's good,
Yes? Okay.
I'm done.
So the other, it's a one-sheet page. It's going to be really tiny for you, if you can make that bigger or not. There you go. But we ran a couple scenarios when we talked to Robert just around the idea of Okay, let's look at, and so I want to highlight that this is not smooth. This is market value. So this is taking in all of the loss, none of the gains from the previous, like this is market value. You can see in the first graph on the left, scenario, the blue is the baseline, scenario 1 is the red, and that is talking about what would we need to contribute to get to 100% funded in 6 years, right? And that would be a little, so that's showing you that essentially that contribution of about $22,400,000 would be for 6 years. And remember, last year you paid about 16, a little over 16, almost 17. Scenario
I'm sorry,
2.
That's the red line?
That's the red line.
Okay, thank you.
So that would get you funded in 6 years. In scenario 2, which is kind of that darker blue, purplish line, you'll see that that is to get you to 100% funded in 10 years. Again, market value, and that contribution would be about $16,100,000, which is a little less than what you contributed last year. So still pretty much in the doable realm. If it was reflected again from last year and the year before, that's about what you contributed. So again, to the point of, are we on the right track? Again, I can't talk to the market, I can't talk to anything else, but I can say that based on the data that we have right now, that's within the doable range. And so, and then we show you kind of where that gets you to that dotted green line that's 100% funded. On the table on the right, you will see the contributions of that 22 million or that 16 million, and then you see it drop down and you're like, well, why doesn't it drop really low? That's because we're putting all of those dollars in the surplus. The actuaries don't assume when you use those surplus dollars, because we have groups that are like, we want to get to 110 so that if there's market fluctuations, we never have to deal with this again. There's others that like, no, we like 105. We have really conservative ones that like higher. We have some that are like, just get us to 100, like I don't even care. Like, so you have the purview of when to decide to use those surplus dollars. So you will choose when to use that. So you could drop down to that blue dotted line at the very bottom that shows your normal cost and say, okay, we've paid off this unfunded liability. We're just going to pay the normal cost. You may choose to do something different. So we kind of illustrate that in a couple of different formats.
Were you going to speak? It looked like you were going to speak.
I guess not, no.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
On the left graph, the middle line,
Yes.
the dot dash one. I think
Yes.
that addresses one of the questions that came up earlier. So our income tax is set to expire, I think, in 2031.
Something like that, yeah.
If we continue at 16 million a year, which is slightly less than we did last year, then it looks like by 2031 we would be over 80%.
You would be. Again, all things being exactly
All things,
the same.
yeah, right. No, I understand. But that's what we're dealing with, right, is projections
Absolutely.
and estimates. And
It's always estimates, because we don't know how long people are going to live or what the market's going to do. all
so
those
that's
fun things.
not bad news.
No, I think
in
it's
my
still
view.
within the doable realm of what you've been doing, and you've been doing a lot of good work. And so I think that that's, again, it sounds like a lot of numbers, big numbers, and they are, but you have kind of a plan in place, which was what the idea of all the analysis we did back a few years ago of trying to get to that place.
Yep.
But that means in 2031, that money dries up.
It
It's
does.
no longer available.
And so that's the challenge. That's why we ran the 6 year, because
Right.
that's about when the timing goes. And so that's, again, a decision for the board to kind of think about. What's our goal? Is it to get to there by 6? Is it 10? What's really our goal? Is it 100%? Is it 80? And we think we can manage with the rest? All of those pieces are questions you'll.
But my memory when we campaigned for this is that our goal was to get to 70 or 80% in the course of the income tax.
Yeah, I don't remember, what the goal was, but just out of curiosity, when, I know there are units of government that are 100%. But in terms of sort of what you see as the best or across the state at this point in time, because I don't think we're in any different situation than most communities, is 80% a satisfactory amount? I mean, if we're shooting for 100%, Or do we really need to do that, I guess is the question.
Well, I will share that based on GASB 68 and other accounting rules and things like that, your amortization schedule is going to get you to 100% by 2037. Well, between 2037 and 2039, depending on what contributions you do. So you are on a goal for that. Now, will you stay at 100%? No, because in between there's going to be market fluctuations from an active employee perspective. But that legacy debt, that one that you've been kind of carrying around for a while, that is set to go. So that's not going to change. So your goal can be 80% by a certain period of time. We're still going to help you get to 100% based on those rules.
Okay.
You're going to make us get to 100%.
Well, because they're kind of required for a
Yeah.
lot of things, including getting the pension grant and all those things. Like those fixed amortization from a Government Accounting Standards Board, national, like those kind of things are kind of in place to kind of help with that. But there's still build for fluctuations in the marketplace.
I have a variation on Mr. Meadows' question, because I know Ms. Root's going to ask somebody sometime this question. So without holding you to the precision of the answer, can you give us some idea of the percentage of municipalities in this system that are under our current percentage and the percentage of municipalities that are over our percentage of fund balance?
I can show you. We have a report that's on our website that anyone can go in. You don't have to log in. So it's a public.
I wouldn't be able to know how to log in anyway,
Okay.
so it would
That's
help if you
fine.
could just.
But it's public knowledge. So we have a report that's called Your Partner in Retirement.
Your partner in retirement?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
it's fun. And so on page, it shows all of our different plans because as you know, you have the defined contribution, the hybrid, the health, you have a lot of different plans with MERS. But in regards to the defined benefit plan, on page 4 of that report, it shows, for example, there are, as of 2022, there are 94 municipalities that are over 100% funded. There are 105 that are in the 90s. There's 138 in the 80s. There's 185 in the 70s. There's 126 in the 60s. There's 63 in the 50s, and there's 35 under 50%. And that's just in the MERS system. So statewide, you'd have to go to Treasury's website. But that's to give you an idea. So it's not a percentage. I guess I could get a calculator and do the math, but the numbers are there.
We're in the bottom third of municipalities in terms of our fund balance.
Currently, yes.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I do have one. So we got this grant, right, from the state, $7.7 million grant, because we were below 60% funded.
Correct.
Right. If we had done something a little bit differently, or the market had been a little differently, then we would not have gotten $7.7 million.
Correct.
What that tells me is that there's a certain degree of policy risk associated with the choices we make, right? We could scrimp and save and try to get to 100% in 6 years by giving up lots of other things and doing $22 million a year. But it's not clear that we would come out the other end ahead, because the state legislature may do something to help municipalities in the bottom third of the state. Do you have any comment on that?
That's definitely political speculation. I think in the past we've not seen this kind of help in the past.
Yeah.
So it's very new. So to predict that it will continue in the future,
Wouldn't want to do that.
your guess is as good as mine. Yeah, for sure. It's unusual. So, but yeah, I have a lot of groups going, gosh, we just missed it, or oh, we just
Yeah.
made it. Like, so there's a lot of political conversation around that grant, and MERS is just, you're just here to administer it. We don't make those decisions, but that's something that your policymakers do.
Okay, thank you for your time tonight.
Actually, I have questions.
Go ahead, yeah, I wanted
Are you seeing any trend changes with police and fire from defined contributions to hybrids?
I would say in the last few years, recruiting and retention has become a very different conversation than it was in the past. And so there has been some request to the MERS board It used to be a rule that if you had a defined benefit and you closed a defined contribution, you could never go back to a full defined benefit, and that's why the city actually went to hybrid for many of their groups. It has recently changed because of the request from municipalities to be able to reopen to defined benefit, and so that was changed in our plan document because there are some trends towards reopening to a defined benefit or adding a hybrid plan. We still have groups that are doing well recruiting in a defined contribution. So again, it really does depend on the pocket and who you're comparing to and all of those pieces. And we run a lot of that in our GovInvest software where you can log in and kind of see, okay, compare me to other municipalities when you're doing negotiations, and that's a tool that's available to the city through MERS. But yeah, if that answers it all, that it was enough of a request for our board to change that policy. So that is kind of new and different in the last few years.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And how long does it take for our hybrid employees to vest?
They're at 6 years. For the
And
defined.
are we seeing lower percentages where people aren't making it the 6 years?
If you look back at your report, and we look at table 3, so I'm going to tell you what page that is.
Okay.
That's going to be on page 25. For your hybrid groups, HA, you have 165 active employees with 50 vested former, meaning they made vesting, and 50 left since then, and only 19 retirees. And for your hybrid FOP, there's 13 actives and 6 vested former. So to give you an idea, you do have some people that transition out, but it looks like they're vested. We'd have to pull and Robert, you may even have that report of the hybrid groups, and if any were terminated and not vested, that would be in that census data that you asked for. So you'd have to go to a more granular level that I have data on right now.
Okay. So terminated or left, like just didn't make it to the 6 year?
Yep, so if they're not vested.
Okay.
Mhm.
And what you read was current, who are currently employed, but it doesn't,
Or vested former, meaning they hit the 6 years and then they moved on.
thank you, but it doesn't capture the ones that didn't make it.
No, that
Or
would
if
be
there's
a
okay.
much more detailed report.
All right. And my other question is, so you mentioned gender differences, and I'm thinking you all have information on if people are married or single.
Correct.
Do you collect race and ethnicity?
We don't at this time.
Why do you think?
That is something, because I've had other groups ask that specifically in regards to life expectancy tables and some of those pieces. It was a bigger conversation even during the COVID impact. And so that is something that would require municipalities to then disclose, and that's something that's kind of protected, like when you're hiring and doing it, like, so it would require a lot more of all the municipalities to change all of their rules of data collecting to then have MERS do it, and we can't force that kind of rules on them. And so at this point, we do not collect that.
Yeah, and I also think, though, it could be an option that MERS offers to people, and to collect the data to understand and tell the truths around who's dying sooner than who, and if it makes sense to raise life expectancy for all people, or why, or how drastic it would look if people understood that zip codes, look different, and also race and ethnicity as well as gender and stuff. So
I know there are other studies. I think it's just from a legal perspective, we would have to have everyone, in order to get a pool to show that kind of trends, it would have to be over a period of time, a number of people, and it would have to be all municipalities, like being able to agree to disclose that. So probably have some kind of disclosures from their employees. So it's a lot of, I'll let the lawyers handle that part of it for sure.
yeah,
But yeah, I understand the sentiment for sure, absolutely. I understand the thought process, and we have had questions like that. I think we run into legal roadblocks.
Thank you. And I am a county employee.
Okay.
And so we all got our MERS statements
All right,
on
yep.
Saturday.
Okay, good.
So we were all talking about our retirement dates. We're like, what's your day? What's your
There
year?
you go. Everybody looks at them. You go on the calculator and see how far out. Yep. Is it worth
So
staying
thank
for
you.
2 more years? Absolutely.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Thank you for coming tonight.
Absolutely.
It's a tough crowd. We know that.
We're all
And
good.
Thanks for answering our questions.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, item 6.2, City Council Strategic Planning. Mr. Belleman.
So this is a progress report for you. When we met on February 23rd and you identified your top 10 strategic priorities, I indicated I was going to go back to staff and have the departments kind of roll their priorities into your 10. And so that's what's been provided to you. Another step that needs to be taken in order to meet the Government Finance Officers Association requirements so that we can continue to get our certificate of achievement for our budget is to actually develop goals. So I'm going to work on taking the material that I have from you, write goals, share them with you to make sure it captures exactly what it is that you want, and what the departments are providing you will be those action items, and some of the items that you've identified will become action items so that I can report to you on a semi-annual basis for the public and then on a quarterly basis to the board.
Okay, is there any discussion or questions, Dr. Altman?
I have a question about number 10, which was the develop a policy or pilot project for relocating above-ground utilities. I see a bunch of items organized underneath that, but I didn't see the connection between, I'm not sure, I saw the connection between those items and that particular goal. And so I'm not sure I'm understanding the structure of the document correctly.
So at the end of the document were a lot of department priorities who they didn't feel fit into any of the above. So item number 10 ends, and then there's some items that we have to bring in.
Okay.
So we still have department priorities that may not dovetail well into the council priorities.
Got it. So I think updating the document a little bit to make that clear would be
Yes.
helpful because,
We'll have a delineation.
yep. And so what this tells me is that we don't really have any action items under number 10 yet, which is fine. But I just wanted to make clear that that was my understanding, that my understanding
Yes.
is correct. All right. Thank you.
Any other council discussion or questions on 6.2? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 6.3, short-term rental legislation. Mr. Belleman?
So we have Maureen Watson-Bulger and Annette Irwin to speak to you about proposed legislation that on short-term rentals.
Good evening, Council. Maureen is here this evening from McKelvey and Associates. I believe she has met you all, but if not, I'll give Maureen a chance to introduce herself and introduce the bill and some of the points, and we're both here to answer your questions.
Thank you. I am Maureen Watson-Bulger with McKelvey Merchant Associates. McKelvey has been proud to represent the city for a number of years. I've been with the firm for over 10 years and transitioned onto this account at that time. Much of my background in the legislature was over appropriations, which fits well with many of the city's goals for state budget items, and I was also the director of policy, and at the time actually worked on some of the legislation and themes of that follow us through these years. So tonight we have before us for discussion a new version of short-term rental bills. This is a very different package than the city has seen in the past at the legislative level. This bill, largely the main bill in the package is referred to is 5438. I believe that you have, a short summary of the goals of the legislation that was prepared by the sponsor of this bill's office. So it doesn't represent a legal opinion or a formal or binding opinion, but it does represent what the chair or what the sponsor was trying to put together when they worked on this bill. So the package has 8 bills in it, and they're all tie-barred together. So 5438 doesn't take effect unless all of the bills in the package also pass. That can be changed by amendment throughout the process, but that's how it was introduced to begin with. So the bills were dropped or introduced in February last month, and there is some discussion of a hearing. First, it was supposed to be this month, but I think maybe it looks like more that it will be in April to begin the testimony on these. And we wanted to understand the position. The goal in the past has always been to protect the city's ability to continue regulating rentals at the local level and to not sort of lose control of that or have the state set sort of rental policy. East Lansing does have a particularly unique approach with the overlays, and we wanted to look at this legislation to be sure that the power to continue under that type of a structure would remain in the city's, as the city's option. And Annette can stop me if I go off here, but
You're doing good.
So the legislation, we believe, currently does allow the city to continue with an overlay approach. I think the goal was to allow a variety of local control options as long as that didn't include an outright ban. There is a lot of friction around this issue. It generally brings out a lot of strong feelings from people on both sides. And I think the attempt at the compromise here is to say that you can't have an outright ban, that short-term rentals must be in some way allowed within the boundaries of the municipality. And so we believe that the overlay districts, do accomplish that type of a system. But we would say, and I think many of you have already reviewed this legislation. It's largely page 10, subsection 11 of the bill that we sort of look at there. I think we could, and I'm interested in feedback, pursue additional clarification in this section to specifically say an overlay. That may be something that we could request. We do have a very engaged delegation from the city. Our representatives in the legislature in both chambers are very engaged and eager to ensure that we have sort of a good outcome as this moves forward. I would also say that I have had conversations with the bill sponsor and the committee chair in the House where this is introduced, and they are also interested in seeing if there are things that could be put in place to make sure that that goal of achieving local control remains in place for the city.
Can you just tell us who the bill sponsors are, those two people you just identified?
Yeah, so Representative Andrews is the main bill sponsor. He introduced 5438. He has a number of co-sponsors on this bill. I can go through those if you'd like, but there's a number.
Is he or she, where is he or she from?
He represents a district. It's sort of a new lakeshore district that was, it had never existed like that before, but it's really along the west side lakeshore of Michigan. And so it touches a number of communities that have that lakeshore piece, which I think is an area where there can be a lot of friction around short-term rentals.
Okay, and the other individual you mentioned?
Representative John Fitzgerald, who represents a piece of the west side over in Kent County, Grand Rapids area, and he's the chair of the local government committee in the House.
What
And-
parties?
Excuse me just a second. Are any of our local legislators sponsors of this package of bills?
Representative Brixey is a sponsor of one of the other bills, not this main bill, and she's also a co-sponsor on here. She's been very interested in the short-term rental issue in the past and saw this as an opportunity, I believe, although I probably shouldn't speculate, for making sure that the city's voice could be heard throughout this process.
Go ahead. Dana, do you have a
What's
question?
their party affiliation to?
The main bill sponsor and the, 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 In the past, this has often come at us from different, parties. It's been an issue that's come up many times in the past with, as I said, some pretty strong feelings.
And my recollection is when this attempt was made before, that your firm was successful with others in inserting some language that I thought was fairly explicit about overlays?
Yes.
Okay. So are you suggesting to us that you think that's still a viable option to get that inserted?
I think it's possible, although it would be very different legislation or very different language this time. In the past, versions of short-term rental legislation has largely worked to eliminate local control or to take some of that power away. It looks very different in the past than the sort of the version that we have in front of us. In the past, we wanted to not be included in that legislation, and I think the legislation here, the amendment may actually seek to clarify that we are included in this legislation, because that sort of sought to eliminate local control, and this seeks to preserve it.
Other questions? Dr. Ullman?
In reading Section 11 of the bill you mentioned, um, 5438, it seemed to me that subsection 3 was the critical one, and I'm just going to read it. A local unit of government shall not enact or enforce any ordinance, rule, or regulation, including but not limited to a zoning ordinance, rule, or regulation that has the effect of totally banning or prohibiting short-term rentals. And so for me, the ambiguity there is the prohibition municipality-wide, as you suggested, or is it at a finer grain? And it sounds like you're suggesting that the natural interpretation would be municipality-wide so that we could allow regions within the city where there would be short-term rentals appropriate, but then we could have other regions where we could, in fact, prohibit them. But then your other comment about how East Lansing takes a somewhat unique approach also resonates. And so it seems to me that having that unique approach reflected in that language so that courts don't accidentally misinterpret it with respect to our unique approach would be pretty important. I'm not sure that that's a question as much as it is a comment. I guess the question is, what are we doing in terms of trying to get language in there to protect us?
Yep, and we've had discussions with the city attorney about this, and he is currently working on writing up some proposed language that can be shared with Maureen so that she can share that with some of the legislature and see if we can be successful in inserting some additional language that would clarify our unique rental restriction overlay districts.
And then that language would be specific to this particular type of approach that seems to differ very much from previous approaches.
Yes.
And then could I ask you to elaborate a little bit on your comment that we would like to be included in this as opposed to excluded from this?
Yes. So what I mean by that is that this bill, essentially says that as long as there isn't a complete ban, that the local municipality has the authority to regulate with reasonable regulation. And so essentially we want to say the strategy that East Lansing has and has had in place for many years qualifies essentially as that reasonable regulation and is included here.
And so then we can do what the other aspects of the various bills would allow us to do to carry forward the regulation. Could you summarize just briefly, so it's a large package of bills that sort of work together in various ways. Could you summarize in a few words what it would do in terms of short-term rentals and how we could perhaps benefit from it, or whether there are any other warning signs we might want to take into account?
Yes, I would be happy to, and Annette maybe jump in if we need to. But the goal here is largely to create a registration at the state level that could be used for compliance and fraud and transparency, things like that, to really codify at the state level that local control piece, as long as it's not an outright ban, and then create this excise tax that's a 6% tax that would be collected. 1% would be retained by the state for administration, and then the balance of that would flow to the local governments where the rental is located. I don't know that we have do you have an estimate? I don't know that we have a number.
No, we don't have a number in what that would mean financially to the city, because it's going to be based on how many short-term rentals we allow through what I presume we would develop ordinances for this. I see it as pretty minimal, because let's say, you pay $200, for example, for a stay, that's going to be $12. And because I don't foresee that we're going to probably allow for an excessive amount of short-term rentals in the city, that will limit any tax that flows to us. So I think it will be somewhat minimal.
Anything else?
Is there any hope at all of preserving a total ban, the possibility of a total ban on short-term rentals?
Let's not call it a ban. Let's call it a reasonable regulation of rental housing in the city of East Lansing.
I'd prefer to call it a ban. It's a hypothetical question. And
Thank you. So let's make it a hypothetical question,
Okay.
please, Dr. Owen.
Yeah, hypothetical.
If the bills if they don't pass, sort of the status quo remains. I think that around this issue, given sort of the strong feelings both sides have had and, swings in political power, that this issue sort of is a perennial issue that we just keep returning to. I think that there is some direction from policymakers at the state level to, in some ways, sort out a compromise, because there is a lot of churn and conflict around this. So I think that, this legislation is an attempt at some type of a compromise that responds to folks that want to be able to do a short-term rental or have a short-term rental while respecting municipalities' local control and sort of unique approach across the state without trying to do sort of a one-size-fits-all. If the legislation doesn't pass, the status quo does remain. And even if the legislation passes, you can't tie the hands of a future legislature to act and do sort of something different. But I think that, given the strong feelings around this issue, I think it will continue to come back up and continue to be an issue that we will face.
And if this legislation fails, then we are currently empowered to enact a prohibition?
I think that's true.
And I would add, this time around, what I have seen is different is the Michigan Municipal League has been at the table in kind of working out this, if we want to call it a compromise, and where in the past they have really more, I think, been taking the side of, this is a complete removal of local control, which they would not be in favor of. So I think that also, I have viewed that also as being different this time than in the past.
You mentioned a registry of information at the state level. Would this registry be available to local law enforcement if we have particular problem short-term rentals, which I anticipate we might in a college town?
Yes, I believe the registry information is available to law enforcement and to the public.
Thank you.
I have a couple things. So you ask us for our guidance, I think, and I don't speak for the group, but I don't want any legislation whatsoever that affects anything in the city of East Lansing that's already going on. That's number one. And number two, digging into this a little bit, there's two things, one of which I guess we can't affect, but maybe they're tied together. So it seems to me that what happens here is that the state now sets up its own regulatory system, for want of better terminology, but then it, in effect, nests in that the ability of the locality to regulate within those statewide regulations. And I assume that there's going to be a cost involved in that in terms of the local governments. So the thought that, this this excise tax is going to be distributed the way it is at the paltry amount that we're talking about in terms of the local governments, I think is short-sighted. And so then the other thing is the hotel bed tax is kind of an interesting little part of this, which a lot of people don't understand, but the hotel bed tax right now in this county goes to the county and then flows through, not to the city of East Lansing. And so it just occurs to me that one way of potentially giving money to the localities is somehow giving them the right to receive that bed tax from these particular organizations. So I guess what I'm looking for is, A, I personally, I don't want it at all, but B, if we have to have it, I want us to be able to continue, in the hypothetical we're talking about, doing what we're still doing. And if they're going to make us start regulating something more, which I think they are, then I would like some money to come to the city to help us regulate it, because Annette's got enough to do. So those are my thoughts. Anybody else thoughts?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things. Because we have some Glencairn residents here this evening, I just want to take a look at this subsection 3. So if this were in effect at this point in time, the class of the Glencairn ordinance that we're considering at this point in time, which bans rentals, that this item 3 would say a local unit of government shall not enact or enforce any ordinance, rule, or regulation, including but not limited to a zoning ordinance, rule, or regulation. Overlay is a zoning rule that has the effect of totally banning or prohibiting short-term rentals. That presents a huge ambiguity to me in terms of whether, if this were in effect, we would be able to continue to do overlays within of that classification anyway, within the city of East Lansing, which also means to me that we absolutely have to have further clarification on this. Even if it were language like within the city or in the city as a whole, that would improve our ability to continue to do the things we've been doing for years. And then the other aspect of this is we don't really, we don't ban, because any licensed rental can operate as a short-term rental if they choose to do so. If that's more financially viable for them, then they can proceed and do that. We do not require them to have year-long leases or anything like that. So we have a certain area of the city that is not going to go back. Let's just say that. The first 3 blocks off of Grand River in particular are not going to become overlay zones. It's not going to happen. So I think at this point, the clarification here is absolutely critical, because I think a judge or a clever attorney would be able to challenge the overlay zone if this particular language were in effect. So I know it's a challenge for you, and hopefully Tony's taking a look at this, but I really think it's critical for doing it. And the realtors are pushing this, right?
I believe this draft was more written and compromised by the Michigan Municipal League.
Okay.
In the past, I think it's realtors maybe had more.
All right. Anyway, those are my comments.
Dana?
So, how long have you been with the city?
I've been on this account for just over 10 years.
So we had talked before about hearing from our lobbyists in general on a quarterly basis. And I was wondering, because I've got other bills that I'm curious about where we're at. And so I was wondering, are you returning soon, or are we still, it's been more than quarterly since we've talked.
I would be happy to.
And I don't know off the top of your head if maybe you have your bills memorized, but House Bill 4947. No, that's 5088. That was the next one, but 5088, that's a water one on reduced rates for people who can't afford their water bill. And then the other one is House Bill 4947 that talks about a city's ability to have rent control. Are you familiar with the House Bill 4947?
I'm not particularly familiar on either of these, but I will say, so we could have a larger discussion with some additional time to prepare some background and talk to the sponsors and committee chairs. But I believe 5088 has had or maybe I think what I had looked at was a Senate version of water affordability.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was a committee hearing or sort of a discussion last fall around those. In some ways, I think that legislation and water affordability has been compared to the way there's some energy assistance provided, and setting up a similar type of funding mechanism around the water affordability as well. That's not an apples to apples comparison, but I think that is some of the discussion. I think through water affordability, as with energy assistance, as with sort of any program, the questions have remained around who pays and who benefits and things like that. But I think that we could probably get into that in more detail at another.
Can I just suggest that we just ask her to come back before the end of April? And if you have a list of bills, get it to the city manager, and it goes for everybody, and then maybe by that time you'll have more data in terms of this package. But I'm sorry, is there anything else you got?
Just one more thing, and this is regarding House Bill 4947 and possible ability for local governments to control rent. The median age in the city of East Lansing is 21, and we know that typically your 21-year-olds don't own houses. So while we're advocating hard for folks that own homes, it's important that we do the same for more people in our community, especially seeing as, again, our median age is 21, and so that means people are renting, and a lot of people are getting into funky renting situations that I would love an opportunity for city councils to assist in or weigh in on.
Okay.
Thank you.
I want to echo what Mr. Meadows said. He's a better attorney than I am, and he expressed it more clearly. But I appreciate what you said to us, but I sure wouldn't want to bet the farm on the language you read to us from that bill. And I understand that it's a world unto itself down there, and a bunch of legislators on both sides have convinced themselves that this is somehow going to be a wonderful compromise. All due credit to them, but I don't think that's very good language. I agree with Mark on that. So anything you can do to make the language more explicit and consistent with our situation, I think would be appreciated.
Yeah,
Anything else for
and
tonight?
And that's what Tony's working on.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, anything else on this topic, folks? Okay, thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Can you arrange with Mr. Bellman to maybe come back by the end of April, or subject to the rest of the council, if it makes more sense to have you come back at some point in May after this bill, maybe before the end, but where you can give us a status?
I would be happy to. I think
Okay.
we'll have a committee hearing in the House committee, I think, in April.
Okay,
But
and
none
then
of us
if I could ask you to get to Miss Irwin so she can post on the website the sponsors of all these bills and where they're from, because I have a funny feeling there's a lot of people in East Lansing would like to reach out to the various sponsors, local and otherwise, and express their opinions about this particular topic. Just a feeling I got. I don't know. Could be wrong. Dr. Altman?
Yeah, I was going to say a version of that, which is I was going to ask, what can we do as a community? There's people here, and there are people listening who are going to want to know what they can do to help.
Yeah, I think I just said it.
Yeah,
didn't I?
well, and if the answer is, I'm not sure what the answer is, but.
Write your legislators. Write all the legislators.
Well, does that include showing up at hearings?
Yeah, that's up to people that, yeah, I'm not, of course, but I don't think they're going to be able to speak at hearings. That's the problem. So the hearings are, Mr. Meadows knows this better than I do, the hearings are pretty orchestrated, correct?
I think if there's a desire to speak, we can certainly request that the chair make time.
Okay.
The more people at that hearing, the more influence it has. If you fill a room with people who are opposed to some activity, you know, the committee is still going to take a look at that. I mean, it's helpful for people to show up down there. It's not like our commission meetings or things like that where people feel they can come to.
Yes.
But if you go down there, it will make an impression, especially if we can fill the room and sort of go out into the hallway. So.
I was going to say, in the past, I do know there's some East Lansing residents who regularly show up for these types of housing bills, and I asked Maureen, because I haven't been down there since before COVID, probably. But, you know, even if someone doesn't want to speak, they can fill out, they were blue, but they still are, blue cards, and just say you don't want to speak, but you're either opposed or in favor of, and be there and be present. And as you say, show them that there's an interest, so.
Thanks, that's sort of what I was wondering.
Okay, thanks. We all set on this topic? Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We'll see you again here in April or May, hopefully. Do we have a motion?
I'll move to adjourn.
Is there a second? Second?
Second.
Altman, moved by Meadows. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thanks, everybody, for coming.